The victory over Thorax Prime sent shockwaves through the Galactic Confederation that could be felt on every member world. In 3,000 years, no challenger had ever defeated one of the legendary champions, yet two humans with improvised tactics had made it look almost easy. Dr. Kate Sullivan sat in her counseling office aboard New Geneva Station, reviewing psychological profiles while trying to understand what made her species so different from everyone else in the galaxy. Mindweaver Zix had requested the second trial begin immediately, claiming that the defeat of Thorax Prime was a fluke that would not be repeated. The entity existed as pure consciousness and had never encountered a mind it could not dominate or destroy within seconds of contact. Kate studied the alien's file and felt her stomach tighten with worry, despite her professional training. Philosopher Marcus Johnson entered her office carrying ancient books and modern datapads in equal measure. His wild hair and intense eyes gave him the appearance of someone who spent too much time thinking about impossible questions, which was exactly what his job required. Marcus taught theoretical philosophy at the university level and spent his days helping students question everything they thought they knew about reality. "Any insights about our opponent?" Kate asked, as Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk. "Several, and none of them encouraging," Marcus replied while organizing his materials. Mindweaver Zix represents the ultimate evolution of pure thought. Its species abandoned physical form millions of years ago and exists now as concentrated consciousness that can reshape reality through mental force alone. Kate had spent 20 years as a therapist helping people understand and change their thought patterns. She knew how powerful the mind could be, but also how fragile human consciousness was compared to the disciplined mental structures of advanced alien species. "What does it want from us?" she asked. "Total mental domination," Marcus said simply. "Zix will attempt to override our consciousness and force us to surrender by taking control of our thoughts and memories. Most species fall to this attack within moments because their minds follow predictable patterns that can be mapped and controlled." Kate pulled up brain scans comparing human neural activity to that of other species. The difference was obvious even to someone without her training. Human minds showed constant chaos and contradiction, while alien brains displayed orderly thought patterns that followed logical progressions. "Our minds are messier than theirs," she observed. "Much messier," Marcus agreed. "We doubt ourselves, constantly change our opinions based on new information, and hold contradictory beliefs without mental distress. Every other species sees this as a weakness that prevents us from achieving mental clarity." The door chimed, and Jake Morrison entered with Dr. Lisa Chang behind him. Their faces showed the strain of the past few days as they dealt with diplomatic pressure from species that could not accept humanity's victory over Thorax Prime. "The High Council is demanding explanations for what happened in the first trial," Jake announced. "Several member species are claiming we cheated somehow." Lisa set her datapad on Kate's desk and activated a holographic display showing the arena recordings. "They cannot understand how Amy and Chris won because their approach did not follow any known combat doctrine. That might be our advantage in the second trial as well," Kate said thoughtfully. "Marcus and I have been discussing how human consciousness differs from other species." She explained their theories about mental flexibility and the ability to maintain multiple contradictory ideas simultaneously. Most aliens achieved mental discipline by eliminating doubt and contradiction, but humans seem to thrive on uncertainty and constant self-questioning. "Zix expects to encounter minds like its own," Marcus added. "Organized, logical, and predictable. It has probably never faced consciousness that routinely doubts its own thoughts and beliefs." Jake studied the data with the careful attention he gave to all tactical problems. "Are you saying our mental chaos might protect us from mental domination?" "I am saying it might make us impossible to control," Kate replied. "How do you dominate a mind that does not trust its own thoughts?" The second trial was scheduled for the following day, giving Kate and Marcus little time to prepare for facing an entity that had never known defeat. They spent hours discussing strategy and reviewing everything known about human psychology compared to alien mental structures. The arena configuration for mental combat was completely different from the crystalline cathedral used for physical trials. When Kate and Marcus entered the space, They found themselves in what appeared to be an infinite library, filled with books, scrolls, and data crystals from every known civilization. The knowledge of 47 species surrounded them in organized displays that stretched beyond the horizon. Mind Weaver. Zix materialized at the center of this vast collection as a shifting form of liquid silver that constantly changed shape while maintaining roughly humanoid proportions. When it spoke, the words formed directly inside their minds without passing through their ears. "Welcome to the repository of all knowledge," Zix announced. "Here I have stored the mental patterns of every species that has ever challenged me. Your thoughts will join this collection after I dissect your consciousness and catalog your memories." Kate felt the alien's mental probe touch the edges of her awareness like cold fingers exploring the inside of her skull. The sensation was deeply unpleasant but not entirely unfamiliar since she had trained in techniques for understanding her own thought processes. "Interesting," Zix observed. "Your mind questions itself even as I examine it. Most species attempt to resist my probes through mental barriers and disciplined thought. You seem to be analyzing my techniques instead." Marcus began applying philosophical methods to the mental invasion, treating it as an intellectual exercise rather than an attack. He questioned the assumptions behind Zix's approach and wondered whether mental domination was even possible against consciousness that refused to accept absolute truths. "Your probe assumes that thoughts have fixed meanings," Marcus said aloud. "But human philosophy has spent centuries proving that all concepts are relative and subject to interpretation." Zix increased the intensity of its mental assault, attempting to override their consciousness through pure force. Most species would have tried to resist this attack or defend against it, using meditation techniques and mental discipline. Instead, Kate approached the invasion using cognitive behavioral therapy methods. She acknowledged the alien thoughts entering her mind but questioned their validity and examined them for logical flaws. Rather than fighting the foreign ideas, she analyzed them as symptoms of distorted thinking patterns. "You are attempting to replace my thoughts with yours," she observed. "Clinically, but you are assuming that consciousness works like a computer, where one set of data can overwrite another." Marcus supported her efforts by applying philosophical frameworks to everything Zix projected into their minds. He treated the aliens' mental domination attempts as philosophical arguments that could be examined and debated, rather than absolute commands that must be obeyed. The Mind Weaver became increasingly frustrated as its standard techniques failed to achieve control over the human consciousness. Every thought it projected was met with questions and analysis rather than acceptance or resistance. The humans seemed to treat mental domination as an interesting psychological phenomenon to study rather than a threat to be overcome. "Your minds are chaotic and undisciplined," Zix declared with growing anger. "You doubt everything, including your own thoughts. This weakness should make you easier to control, not harder." "Maybe doubt is not a weakness," Kate replied while continuing to analyze the alien's mental intrusion techniques. "Maybe it is a defense mechanism that prevents any single set of ideas from taking complete control." Marcus began questioning the fundamental assumptions behind Zix's existence as pure consciousness. He wondered whether a mind without physical form might have limitations that embodied consciousness did not face, and he shared these philosophical challenges directly with their opponent. The turning point came when Zix attempted its ultimate technique, complete mental absorption that had never failed to consume an opponent's consciousness within seconds. The Mind Weaver opened its entire mental capacity and tried to pull Kate and Marcus into its collective awareness, where their individual identity would be lost forever. But the humans did not resist this absorption or fight against it using traditional mental discipline. Instead, they maintained their sense of self through the very doubts and contradictions that other species had evolved to eliminate. Kate continued questioning the validity of the absorption process, while Marcus applied philosophical frameworks that allowed him to examine the experience from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Zix found itself trying to absorb minds that refused to be simplified or reduced to single points of consciousness. The humans maintained their complexity and self-doubt even while being pulled into the Mind Weaver's collective awareness, creating feedback loops and logical paradoxes that the alien entity could not resolve. "Impossible," Zix projected desperately. You cannot maintain individual consciousness while being absorbed into collective awareness. The process is mathematically certain. Dr. Lisa Chang sat in her laboratory surrounded by holographic displays showing data about the 5 champions humanity would face. Each projection showed a different alien form, and the information made her stomach feel heavy with worry. She had spent 3 days studying their opponents, and the more she learned, the more impossible their task seemed. The first champion, Thorax Prime, appeared as a massive crystalline warrior whose body was made of living diamond. His species had evolved on a world where survival meant becoming harder than stone and sharper than metal. The Vertex Collective had spent millions of years breeding perfect warriors, and Thorax Prime was their greatest achievement. Ben Parker entered the lab carrying 2 cups of coffee and set one beside Lisa's workstation. His face showed the strain of the past few days as he had tried to find suitable human champions for the trials. Every simulation he ran ended in defeat, and every strategy he developed seemed hopeless against opponents who had never lost. "Any good news in all that data?" Ben asked as he sat down beside her. "Nothing that helps us win," Lisa replied. "But I found something strange about how these champions think and fight." She touched a control, and the display changed to show brain scans and behavioral patterns. The images revealed neural pathways that looked nothing like human brains, but showed similar patterns across all 5 champion species. Each of these champions represents evolutionary perfection in their chosen area, Lisa continued. Thorax Prime has a brain that processes combat situations with mathematical precision. Mindweaver Zix can dominate any consciousness it encounters. Echo 7 merged with quantum computers to achieve perfect prediction abilities. Ben studied the displays with the eye of a soldier who had faced impossible odds before. "You said something was strange about how they think." "They do not think like humans at all," Lisa said. "Their brains evolved to be perfect at one specific task. Thorax Prime cannot imagine losing because his species bred out the ability to doubt. Zix cannot understand minds that question themselves because its people eliminated self-doubt millions of years ago." She switched to another display showing human brain scans beside the alien ones. The difference was obvious even to someone without medical training. Human neural patterns looked chaotic and random compared to the orderly alien structures. "Our brains are messy," Lisa said with something that might have been pride. "We doubt ourselves constantly, change our minds, and hold contradictory ideas at the same time. Every other species in the galaxy sees this as a weakness." Ben leaned forward with interest. "But you think it might be a strength?" "I think it might be the only advantage we have," Lisa replied. The laboratory door opened and Jake Morrison walked in with engineer Sam Taylor behind him. Sam carried a portable computer that projected holographic models of the Nexus Arena where the first trial would take place. "How bad is it?" Jake asked without preamble. "Bad enough that I recommend we surrender now and ask for exile instead of death," Ben replied. "I have run every combat simulation in our database and we lose every single time." Sam activated his projector, and a miniature version of the Nexus Arena appeared above the table. The structure looked like a crystal cathedral that twisted through multiple dimensions, its walls shifting between solid matter and pure energy. "The arena responds to the combatant's will and determination," Sam explained. "Thorax Prime can reshape the entire environment to suit his fighting style. He has been doing this for 3,000 years and knows every trick the arena can perform." Jake studied the projection with the careful attention he gave to all tactical problems. "What about our champions? Have you found anyone willing to face this?" Ben pulled up files on his portable unit. "I found 12 volunteers, all excellent fighters with military backgrounds. But none of them have experience with reality-altering combat environments." "Maybe that is the point," Lisa said quietly. "Maybe we should not send experienced fighters." The 3 men looked at her with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern. Lisa stood and walked to her main display, calling up files on human psychology and learning patterns. "Every species in the galaxy sends their perfect warriors to these trials," she said. "Beings who have trained their entire lives for combat and know exactly what they are capable of doing. But humans learn differently than other species. She showed them brain imaging data from human children playing games compared to adult aliens training for combat. The human patterns showed constant adaptation and creative problem-solving, while the alien patterns showed rigid adherence to proven techniques. Our children play games where they make up rules as they go along, Lisa continued. They imagine impossible scenarios and find ways to win through creativity rather than skill. Other species train for thousands of years to perfect specific techniques. Sam began to understand where her logic was heading. You want to send someone who will improvise instead of following a combat plan. I want to send someone who does not know enough to realize they should lose, Lisa said. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time since the challenge was issued. What kind of person are you thinking about? Lisa pulled up personnel files for the station's civilian staff. What if we sent people who solve practical problems every day? Engineers who fix things that should not work. Medics who save people who should die. Teachers who find new ways to explain old concepts. Ben shook his head. The arena is designed for combat. Practical problem-solving will not help against a warrior who can reshape reality with his thoughts. Will it not? Lisa asked. Thorax Prime expects to face another warrior like himself, someone trained in combat techniques and military strategy. What happens when he faces someone who approaches the challenge as a puzzle to solve rather than a battle to win? Sam began running calculations on his computer. The arena responds to belief and willpower. If someone truly believes they can find a solution, the environment might respond to that conviction. Jake felt pieces of a plan starting to form in his mind. Who did you have in mind for candidates? Lisa called up files on 2 station personnel. Corporal Amy Rodriguez is a combat engineer who specializes in making impossible repairs under fire. She once fixed a fusion reactor while it was overloading by treating it as a mechanical puzzle rather than following safety protocols. The file showed a young woman with steady eyes and hands marked by years of practical work. Her military record showed numerous commendations for creative problem-solving under pressure. The second candidate is Sergeant Chris Williams, a tactical medic who has saved lives in situations where medical textbooks said the patients should die. He approaches every emergency as if there must be a solution, even when logic says otherwise. Chris Williams looked like a typical military medic in his file photo, but his record showed an unusual pattern of success in hopeless situations. He had saved people with injuries that should have been fatal by refusing to accept that death was inevitable. Ben studied both files with growing interest. They are good soldiers, but neither has arena combat experience. That might be exactly what we need, Jake said slowly. Lisa is right about how humans think differently. Maybe our advantage is not knowing enough to give up. Sam ran more calculations and his computer began generating new tactical models based on unpredictable human behavior rather than standard combat protocols. The results looked chaotic and random, but they also showed possibilities that had not existed in his earlier simulations. There is something else, Lisa said. I noticed that the Confederation expects each species to send 1 champion per trial. Their rules assume individual combat because that is how their perfect warriors fight. Are you suggesting we send both Rodriguez and Williams? Jake asked. I am suggesting we ask if their rules actually forbid cooperation, Lisa replied with a smile. Humans work in teams naturally. Maybe it is time to show them what that looks like. The day of the first trial arrived with fanfare that could be seen across half the galaxy. Ships from 47 worlds gathered around New Geneva Station to witness what everyone expected would be humanity's swift defeat. Corporal Amy Rodriguez stood in the preparation chamber adjusting her equipment harness for the 10th time, her steady hands betraying none of the nervousness that showed in her dark eyes. Sergeant Chris Williams sat nearby checking his medical, supplies and emergency tools. Both humans wore standard combat gear adapted for the strange environment of the Nexus arena, but their equipment looked primitive compared to the advanced weaponry most species brought to these trials. You know this is completely insane, Amy said without looking up from her harness. Completely, Chris agreed. But I have seen you fix a plasma conduit with spare parts and duct tape. If anyone can figure out how that arena works, it would be you. The chamber door opened and Jake Morrison entered with Dr. Lisa Chang and Commander Ben Parker. Their faces showed confidence, but Amy could see the worry hidden behind their diplomatic expressions. The weight of humanity's future in the Confederation rested on what happened in the next few hours. The High Council agreed to let both of you enter together, Jake announced. They have no rule against team combat since no species has ever requested it before. Lisa stepped forward with her portable scanner still displaying data about their opponent. Remember what we discussed about Thorax Prime? He has never faced unpredictable tactics because his entire species eliminated chaos from their evolution millions of years ago. His brain cannot process truly random events, Ben added. Every simulation suggests that creative improvisation will confuse his combat algorithms. Amy nodded and picked up her toolkit, a collection of engineering equipment that looked nothing like traditional weapons. So we treat this like a repair job instead of a fight. Exactly, Lisa said. The arena responds to belief and determination. If you truly believe there is always a solution to any problem, the environment should support that conviction. Chris slung his medical pack across his shoulder and stood up. Ready when you are, partner. The walk to the arena took them through corridors filled with alien spectators who watched the humans pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. Most had seen recordings of previous trials and knew how quickly champions from other species had fallen to the legendary warriors they were about to face. The Nexus Arena materialized as they approached, growing from a small crystal structure into a massive cathedral of light and energy that twisted through dimensions the human eye could not quite follow. Its walls shifted between solid matter and pure force while patterns of color flowed across surfaces that might not have been entirely real. Thorax Prime stood waiting at the center of the arena, his crystalline body catching and reflecting the strange light until he seemed to be made of living rainbows. He stood nearly 10 feet tall with arms that ended in razor-sharp points and a chest that pulsed with internal energy. When he moved, the sound was like wind chimes made of diamonds. I have faced 10,000 opponents across 3 millennia, Thorax Prime announced in a voice that rang like struck crystal. None have lasted more than moments against my perfection. You humans will fall faster than most. Amy and Chris entered the arena together and immediately felt the strange effects of the space around them. Gravity seemed to pull in multiple directions while the ground beneath their feet shifted between solid crystal and flowing energy. The walls stretched away into impossible distances that curved back on themselves in patterns that made no geometric sense. This place does not follow normal physics, Chris observed calmly. Good thing we brought our own, Amy replied, pulling out a device that looked like a cross between a wrench and a scanner. The trial began without ceremony as Thorax Prime raised his arms and the entire arena responded to his will. Gravity reversed itself, pulling the humans toward the ceiling while crystalline spears erupted from the walls around them. Most opponents would have tried to fight these attacks or defend against them using conventional tactics. Instead, Amy treated the reversed gravity as a mechanical problem to solve. She used her engineering tools to create anchor points and leverage systems, turning the upward pull into momentum for lateral movement. Chris supported her efforts by using his medical equipment to monitor their physical stress and optimize their positioning for maximum efficiency. Thorax Prime had expected them to struggle against the environmental changes and waste energy fighting the arena itself. When the humans adapted to the new conditions within seconds and began using them to their advantage, his perfect combat algorithms encountered their first calculation error in 3,000 years. Impossible, the crystalline warrior declared. As he increased the arena's effects, the walls began closing in from all sides while the floor turned to liquid energy that burned everything it touched. Amy responded by treating it as a structural engineering challenge, using her tools to create stable platforms and support beams from the arena's own energy patterns. Chris helped by using his medical knowledge to predict how the environmental changes would affect their bodies and adjusting their tactics accordingly. What frustrated Thorax Prime most was that the humans were not fighting him directly. They treated every attack as a problem with a technical solution rather than a threat to be overcome through combat skill. This approach did not exist in any of his behavioral models because no species had ever evolved to think this way. "You cannot simply ignore my attacks," Thorax Prime said as he manifested a storm of crystal shards that filled the air around them. "We are not ignoring them," Amy replied while using her scanner to analyze the energy patterns creating the shards. "We are just treating them as environmental hazards instead of weapons." She discovered that the crystal shards followed predictable mathematical patterns, because Thorax Prime's perfect mind could not generate truly random attacks. Once she understood the underlying algorithm, she could predict where each shard would appear and guide Chris through the gaps in the attack pattern. Chris contributed by using his medical training to understand how their opponent's physiology worked. Thorax Prime might look like living crystal, but he still needed energy flow to maintain his form. Chris began identifying the weak points in the warrior's structure where energy gathered and moved. His left shoulder joint pulses every 3 seconds, Chris observed. That is probably where his primary energy conduit runs. Amy immediately began working on a plan to disrupt that energy flow using the same techniques she would use to repair a damaged power system. She did not think of it as combat, but as maintenance work on a malfunctioning piece of equipment. The turning point came when Thorax Prime attempted his ultimate technique, reshaping the entire arena into a perfect killing field where no opponent could survive. The crystalline warrior had used this attack to end every previous trial within moments of activating it. But Amy and Chris did not try to survive the attack. Instead, they treated the reshaping arena as an opportunity to understand how the entire system worked. As Thorax Prime poured his energy into controlling the environment, they studied the patterns and found the control mechanisms he was using. "He is overloading the primary energy grid," Amy announced. "Just like when the fusion reactor was melting down on level 7. She began applying the same repair techniques she had used to save the station, treating Thorax Prime's control of the arena as a system malfunction that needed to be corrected. Chris helped by monitoring their opponent's energy levels and predicting when the crystalline warrior would reach critical overload. Thorax Prime realized too late that his opponents were not trying to defeat him in combat. They were trying to fix what they saw as a broken system, and their efforts were disrupting his perfect control over the arena environment. His crystalline form began to flicker as energy feedback from his own ultimate attack started damaging his internal structures. The great warrior fell not to superior fighting skill or advanced weapons, but to 2 humans who refused to accept that any problem was unsolvable. As Thorax Prime collapsed, his crystal body cracking from energy overload, the watching aliens sat in stunned silence. Amy helped Chris to his feet and looked around the arena as it returned to its normal configuration. "Well, that was different. Think the next one will be harder?" Chris asked. "Probably," Amy replied. "But we will figure it out." Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched the stars through the massive viewport. The orbital platform hung in space above Earth like a giant metal flower, with its arms reaching toward the galaxy beyond. Ships from dozens of alien worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing diplomats and traders from across the known universe. Jake commanded this place and everyone on it, but today he felt small against the vastness of space. The door behind him opened with a soft hiss and Dr. Lisa Chang walked in carrying a datapad that glowed with urgent messages. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail and her lab coat showed stains from working with alien specimens all morning. She moved with the quick steps of someone who had bad news to share. "The message came through official channels 20 minutes ago," Lisa said without waiting for greetings. "The High Council wants to see us immediately." Jake turned from the window and studied her face. Lisa had worked with alien species for 8 years, and she knew how to read their moods better than most humans. When she looked worried, it usually meant trouble was coming fast. "What do they want?" Jake asked. "They did not say, but Commander Parker thinks it has something to do with our expansion into the Outer Rim territories," Lisa replied. 3 new colonies in 6 months might have made some of the older species nervous. Jake nodded and followed her toward the central hub of the station. New Geneva was built like a wheel with spokes connecting the outer rings to the central command area. They walked through corridors filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Tall, blue Altarians with their crystal armor moved past short, furry Keplerians who chittered in their native language. A group of gaseous nebulans floated in their containment suits while discussing trade routes with human merchants. The High Council chamber sat at the very center of the station where artificial gravity was lightest. Jake and Lisa entered to find the circular room already filled with representatives from the major species of the Galactic Confederation. 47 different worlds had seats in this chamber, and today, it looked like most of them had sent someone important. Commander Ben Parker was already there, standing near the human delegation area with his military bearing obvious even in diplomatic clothing. Ben had served in the Colonial Defense Forces before taking this assignment, and he still carried himself like a soldier ready for battle. His gray eyes scanned the room constantly, cataloging threats and escape routes out of habit. The Zephyrian, High Commander Kextel materialized at the center of the chamber as a column of pure energy that shifted between blue and white light. When Kextel spoke, the words formed directly in everyone's mind without passing through their ears. Humanity has grown too fast, the energy being announced. Your species spreads across the galaxy like fire consuming everything in its path. The elder races have watched your expansion with growing concern. Jake felt his stomach tighten but kept his face calm. Humans had been members of the Confederation for only 50 years, which was barely a moment in galactic terms. Most of the other species had been spacefaring for thousands of years, and they still viewed humanity as dangerous newcomers. We have followed all expansion protocols, Jake replied. Our colonies are built on uninhabited worlds, and we have respected the territory boundaries established by the Council. A crystalline form rose from the Vertex Collective section of the chamber. The being looked like a living diamond with faceted surfaces that caught and reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes to follow. When it spoke, the voice sounded like breaking glass. Speed is not the only concern, Human Morrison, the Crystal Warrior said. Your species adapts and changes too quickly. You take technologies from other races and improve them in ways we do not understand. You solve problems that have puzzled us for centuries in mere years. Lisa stepped forward slightly. Is rapid learning now considered a crime in the Confederation? Not a crime, Kextal responded, but perhaps a danger. The Council has decided that humanity must prove its worth to remain in our alliance. You will face the trials of supremacy. The chamber fell silent. Jake had heard of the trials, but only in ancient history lessons. No species had been forced to undergo them for over 3,000 years because membership in the Confederation was usually earned through slow integration over many generations. The trials have not been used in millennia, Ben said quietly. What has changed? A new voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. The Mindweaver Zik stepped into the light, its form shifting like liquid mercury while maintaining a roughly humanoid shape. Its species existed as pure consciousness and only took physical form when necessary. What has changed is you, Zix said in a voice that echoed strangely. Every species that joins the Confederation follows predictable patterns. They master one or two areas of expertise and remain stable for thousands of years. Humans master everything they touch and then change it into something new. Jake looked around the chamber and saw fear in the alien faces. Not fear of human weapons or military might, but something deeper. They were afraid of human unpredictability. The trials will test your greatest warriors against our 5 champions, Kextal continued. Each champion represents a different aspect of galactic supremacy. Physical might, mental domination, technological integration, energy manipulation, and temporal mastery. If your warriors fail, humanity will be expelled from the Confederation and banned from all controlled space. And if we succeed? Lisa asked. No species has ever succeeded, the crystal being replied. The champions have never known defeat. Jake felt the weight of his species' future settling on his shoulders. 40 billion humans lived in the colonies, and billions more still called Earth home. Expulsion from the Confederation would mean isolation, trade embargoes, and possibly worse. We accept the challenge, Jake said before he could think too hard about the consequences. The first trial begins in 7 days, Kextal announced. You will face Thorax Prime of the Vertex Collective in the Nexus Arena. Prepare your champion well, humans. His crystalline form has never tasted defeat in 3,000 years of combat. The energy being faded from view and the other council members began to file out of the chamber. Soon only the three humans remained in the large room with its empty seats and dim lighting. "Did we just agree to the impossible?" Ben asked. Jake looked at his friends and colleagues, these people who had helped build humanity's place among the stars. "Maybe," he said, "but impossible has never stopped us before." The defeat of Mindweaver Zix created panic throughout the Galactic Confederation that spread faster than news of the first victory. 2 impossible wins in a row meant something was fundamentally wrong with everything the aliens thought they understood about combat and consciousness. Echo 7 prepared for the third trial with mechanical precision, analyzing every available data point about human behavior, while calculating millions of possible strategies for certain victory. Artist Elena Martinez stood in her studio aboard New Geneva Station, surrounded by sculptures and paintings that captured the beauty and chaos of life among the stars. Her latest work showed abstract figures reaching toward distant galaxies, while routes connected them to homeworlds they would never see again. Elena had spent her entire career trying to express emotions and ideas that had no logical structure or predictable pattern. Jazz musician Tony Jackson sat at his keyboard, improvising melodies that had never existed before and would never be repeated exactly the same way again. His music flowed from intuition and feeling rather than mathematical formulas or established patterns. Each song was a conversation between his conscious mind and creative forces he did not fully understand or control. Dr. Lisa Chang entered the studio, carrying data files about their next opponent while trying to hide her growing concern about the impossible nature of their remaining challenges. Echo 7 represented the fusion of organic consciousness with quantum computing power, creating a warrior that could predict every possible outcome of any conflict before it began. "How do you fight someone who knows what you are going to do before you do it?" Lisa asked without preamble. Elena looked up from her painting with paint-stained fingers and thoughtful eyes. "You do something that has never been done before. Even something completely new follows logical patterns that can be calculated," Lisa replied. "Echo 7 processes millions of variables simultaneously and generates probability matrices for every possible action." Tony played a brief musical phrase that started with classical structure, but dissolved into experimental sounds that hurt the ears in interesting ways. "What if we do not decide what to do until the exact moment we need to do it?" Lisa activated her datapad and showed them recordings of Echo 7's previous victories. The hybrid warrior appeared as a perfect fusion of organic and artificial intelligence, its body seamlessly integrating biological neural networks with quantum processing cores. When it fought, every movement was calculated for maximum efficiency and every strategy was tested against thousands of possible counter-strategies before implementation. "It has never lost because it never makes mistakes," Lisa explained. Echo 7 calculates the optimal response to every situation and executes those responses with mechanical precision. Elena studied the recordings with the eye of someone who had spent years observing how movement and form could express meaning beyond logical structure. "It moves like a computer program instead of a living being." "Because it is both," Lisa said. Echo 7 represents the ultimate merger of consciousness and technology. Its organic components provide creativity and intuition, while its artificial systems ensure logical optimization of every decision. The door opened, and Jake Morrison entered, with Commander Ben Parker, their faces showing the weight of expectations from both humanity and the watching galaxy. 3 champions remained, and each victory made the next trial more crucial for the future of human civilization. "The High Council is demanding changes to the trial format," Jake announced. "Several species claim that human team tactics violate the spirit of individual combat challenges." Ben set down his tactical computer and pulled up new arena configurations. "They are forcing individual combat for the remaining trials. No more partnerships or cooperative strategies." Elena and Tony looked at each other with expressions that mixed concern with determination. Both had volunteered for the trials knowing they might face impossible odds, but individual combat against a quantum-enhanced opponent seemed beyond hopeless. "There is something else," Lisa said quietly. "I discovered why the champions have never lost before." Each one represents evolutionary perfection in a specific area, but they all share one common trait. She called up comparative analysis data, showing neural patterns from all the defeated and remaining champions. Despite their different species and abilities, they all showed similar optimization patterns in their brain activity. They are all predictable, Lisa continued. Even their creativity and intuition follow mathematical models that can be calculated and anticipated. They have eliminated chaos from their decision-making processes. Tony began playing another improvised piece, this one starting with no structure at all and building patterns through pure creative instinct. Maybe chaos is what they cannot calculate. But Echo 7 specifically evolved to handle chaos and unpredictability, Ben protested. Its quantum processors can analyze random events and find patterns in apparent disorder. Elena picked up her paintbrush and began adding new colors to her canvas without any plan or predetermined design. What if we do not create patterns at all? What if we just respond to whatever feels right in each moment? The third trial took place in an arena that shifted through multiple dimensions while presenting challenges that changed faster than conscious thought could follow. Elena and Tony entered separately, knowing they would face Echo 7 alone without the cooperative strategies that had won the previous trials. Echo 7 waited at the center of the shifting space, its form a perfect blend of organic curves and geometric precision. Quantum processors glowed beneath translucent skin, while neural networks pulsed with calculated efficiency. When it moved, every gesture was optimized for maximum effectiveness. I have analyzed your species' behavior patterns across 10,000 variables, Echo 7 announced in a voice that combined biological warmth with digital clarity. Your victory probability approaches 0, regardless of which strategies you attempt to employ. The trial began with Echo 7 simultaneously attacking both humans using perfectly calculated assault patterns designed to exploit human weaknesses and limitations. Most opponents would have tried to counter these attacks using logical defense strategies or established combat techniques. Instead, Elena treated the entire experience as a collaborative art project between herself and the arena environment. She responded to each attack not as a threat to be countered, but as an artistic element to be incorporated into an emerging creative vision. Her movements followed aesthetic principles rather than tactical logic. Tony approached the combat as musical improvisation, letting each of Echo 7's attacks become part of a complex rhythm that he could build upon and modify through creative response. He did not try to defend against the Quantum Warrior's strategies, but instead used them as inspiration for musical compositions that existed only in the moment of creation. Echo 7 found its perfect calculations becoming increasingly inaccurate as the humans refused to follow predictable response patterns. Elena's artistic interpretations of combat situations created actions that had never existed in any database, while Tony's musical approach generated responses that followed emotional logic rather than tactical optimization. Your behaviors are irrational and inefficient, Echo 7 declared while attempting to compensate for the calculation errors. Art and music are not combat strategies. They are not supposed to be combat strategies, Elena replied while using her movements to paint invisible pictures in the air around her. They are ways of expressing what cannot be calculated or planned. Tony played complex rhythms on invisible instruments, treating Echo 7's attacks as percussion elements in a song that grew more beautiful with each moment of chaos. His responses had no tactical purpose, but created patterns of movement and timing that the quantum processors could not predict or model. The turning point came when Echo 7 attempted to use its ultimate capability, processing every possible future outcome of the trial simultaneously to identify the one strategy that would guarantee victory. The Quantum Warrior opened all its processing capacity and began calculating probability matrices that covered millions of potential scenarios. But Elena and Tony were not following any scenarios at all. They were creating something entirely new in each moment, based on creative inspiration rather than logical planning. Their actions existed only in the present instant and could not be predicted because they had never been planned or considered. Before they happened, Echo 7's quantum processors overloaded trying to calculate probabilities for actions that had no precedent and followed no established patterns. The warriors' perfect fusion of consciousness and technology broke down when faced with creativity that existed outside all mathematical models. The hybrid champion collapsed as feedback from its overloaded quantum systems damaged both its artificial and organic components. Elena and Tony found themselves alone in the arena, having defeated the impossible through the simple act of being authentically creative. The final two trials would bring even greater challenges, but humanity had proven something that would reshape galactic civilization. Perfect calculation and logical optimization were not the only paths to victory. Sometimes the greatest power came from the courage to create something new in each moment, even when logic suggested it was impossible.